The Farmer and His Sons. A rich old farmer, who felt that he had not many more days to live, called his sons to his bedside.
"My sons,"
he said,
"heed what I have to say to you. Do not on any account part with the estate that has belonged to our family for so many generations. Somewhere on it is hidden a rich treasure. I do not know the exact spot, but it is there, and you will surely find it. Spare no energy and leave no spot unturned in your search."
The father died, and no sooner was he in his grave than the sons set to work digging with all their might, turning up every foot of ground with their spades, and going over the whole farm 2 or 3 times. No hidden gold did they find, but at harvest time, when they had settled their accounts and had pocketed a rich profit far greater than that of any of their neighbors, they understood that the treasure their father had told them about was the wealth of a bountiful crop, and that in their industry had they found the treasure. Industry is itself a treasure. The 2 pots. 2 pots, one of brass and the other of clay, stood together on the hearthstone. One day the brass pot proposed to the earthen pot that they go out into the world together. But the earthen pot excused himself, saying that it would be wiser for him to stay in the corner by the fire.
"It would take so little to break me,"
he said.
"You know how fragile I am. The least shock is sure to shatter me."
"Don't let them keep you at home,"
urged the brass pot.
"I shall take very good care of you. If we should happen to meet anything hard, I will step between and save you."
So the earthen pot at last consented, and the 2 set out side by side, jolting along on 3 stubby legs, first to this side, then to that, and bumping into each other at every step. The earthen pot could not survive that sort of companionship very long. They had not gone 10 paces before the earthen pot cracked, and at the next jolt he flew into 1,000 pieces. Equals make the best friends. The Goose and the Golden Egg. There was once a countryman who possessed the most wonderful goose you can imagine, for every day when he visited the nest, the goose had laid a beautiful, glittering golden egg. The countryman took the eggs to market and soon began to get rich. But it was not long before he grew impatient with the goose, because she gave him only a single golden egg a day. He was not getting rich fast enough. Then one day, after he had finished counting his money, the idea came to him that he could get all the golden eggs at once by killing the goose and cutting it open. But when the deed was done, not a single golden egg did he find, and his precious goose was dead. Those who have plenty want more, and so lose all they have. The Fighting Bulls and the Frog. 2 bulls were fighting furiously in a field, at one side of which was a marsh. An old frog living in the marsh trembled as he watched the fierce battle.
"What are you afraid of?"
asked a young frog.
"Do you not see,"
replied the old frog,
"that the bull who is bitten will be driven away from the good forests up there to the reeds of this marsh, and we shall all be trampled into the mud?"
It turned out as the frog had said. The beaten bull was driven to the marsh, where his great hoofs crushed the frogs to death. When the great fall out, the weak must suffer for it. The Mouse and the Weasel. A little hungry mouse found his way one day into a basket of corn. He had to squeeze himself a good deal to get through the narrow opening between the strips of the basket. But the corn was tempting, and the mouse was determined to get in. When at last he had succeeded, he gorged himself to bursting. Indeed, he became about 3 times as big around the middle as he was when he went in. At last, he felt satisfied and dragged himself to the opening to get out again. But the best he could do was to get his head out. So there he sat, groaning and moaning, both from the discomfort inside him and his anxiety to escape from the basket. Just then, a weasel came by. He understood the situation quickly.
My friend,
He said,
I know what you've been doing. You've been stuffing. That's what you get. You would have to stay there till you feel just like you did when you went in. Good night, and good enough for you.
and that was all the sympathy the poor mouse got. Greediness leads to misfortune. The Farmer and the Snake. A farmer walked through his field one cold winter morning. On the ground lay a snake, stiff and frozen with the cold. The farmer knew how deadly the snake could be, and yet he picked it up and put it in his bosom to warm it back to life. The snake soon revived, and when it had had enough strength, bit the man who'd been so kind to it. The bite was deadly, and the farmer felt that he must die. As he drew his last breath, he said to those standing around, "Learn from my fate not to take pity on a scoundrel." The Sick Stag. A stag had fallen sick. He had just strength enough to gather some food and find a quiet clearing in the woods, where he lay down to wait until his strength should return. The animals heard about the stag's illness and came to ask after his health. Of course, they were all hungry and helped themselves freely to the stag's food. And as you would expect, the stag soon starved to death. Goodwill is worth nothing unless it is accompanied by good acts. The Goatherd and the Wild Goats. One cold, stormy day, a goatherd drove his goats for shelter into a cave, where a number of wild goats had also found their way. The shepherd wanted to make the wild goats part of his flock, so he fed them well. But to his own flock he gave only just enough food to keep them alive. When the weather cleared and the shepherd led the goats out to feed, the wild goats scampered off to the hills.
Is that the thanks I get for feeding you and treating you so well?
Complained the shepherd.
Do not expect us to join your flock.
Replied one of the wild goats.
We know how you would treat us later on, if some stranger should come as we did.
It is unwise to treat old friends badly for the sake of new ones. The Spendthrift and the Swallow. A young fellow who was very popular among his boon companions as a good spender quickly wasted his fortune trying to live up to his reputation. Then one fine day in early spring, he found himself with not a penny left, and no property save the clothes he wore. He was to meet some jolly young men that morning, and he was at his wits' end how to get enough money to keep up appearances. Just then, a swallow flew by, twittering merrily, and the young man, thinking summer had come, hastened off to a clothes dealer, to whom he sold all the clothes he wore, down to his very tunic. A few days later, a change in weather brought a severe frost, and the poor swallow and that foolish young man in his light tunic, and with his arms and knees bare, could scarcely keep life in their shivering bodies. One swallow does not make a summer. The Cat and the Birds. A cat was growing very thin. As you have guessed, he did not get enough to eat. One day he heard that some birds in the neighborhood were ailing and needed a doctor. So he put on a pair of spectacles and with a leather box in his hand, knocked at the door of the birds' home. The birds peeped out, and Dr. Cat, with much solicitude, asked how they were. He would be very happy to give them some medicine.
Tweet, tweet!
Laughed the birds.
Very smart, aren't you? We are very well, thank you, and more so if you only keep away from here.
Be wise and shun the quack. The Dog and the Oyster. There was once a dog who was very fond of eggs. He visited the henhouse very often, and at last got so greedy that he would swallow the eggs whole. One day the dog wandered down to the seashore. There he spied an oyster. In a twinkling the oyster was resting in the dog's stomach, shell and all. It pained the dog a good deal, as you can guess.
I've learned that all round things are not eggs,
he said, groaning. Act in haste and repent at leisure, and often in pain. The Astrologer. A man who lived a long time ago believed that he could read the future in the stars. He called himself an astrologer and spent his time at night gazing at the sky. One evening he was walking along the open road outside the village. His eyes were fixed on the stars. He thought he saw there that the end of the world was at hand, when all at once, down he went into a hole full of mud and water. There he stood up to his ears in the muddy water, and madly clawing at the slippery sides of the hole in his effort to climb out. His cries for help soon brought the villagers running. As they pulled him out of the mud, one of them said,
You pretend to read the future in the stars, and yet you fail to see what is at your feet. This may teach you to pay more attention to what is right in front of you, and let the future take care of itself.
What use is it?
said another.
To read the stars when you can't see what's right here on the earth.
Take care of the little things, and the big things will take care of themselves. 3 bullocks and a lion. A lion had been watching 3 bullocks feeding in an open field. He had tried to attack them several times, but they had kept together and helped each other to drive him off. The lion had little hope of eating them, for he was no match for 3 strong bullocks with their sharp horns and hoofs. But he could not keep away from that field, for it is hard to resist watching a good meal, even when there is little chance of getting it. Then one day the bullocks had a quarrel, and when the hungry lion came to look at them and licked his chops, as he was accustomed to do, he found them in separate corners of the field, as far away from one another as they could get. It was now an easy matter for the lion to attack them one at a time, and this he proceeded to do with the greatest satisfaction and relish. In unity is strength.